Zambia bloodbath alert. Archbishop Banda's warning before November 28th mass protest at State House. Good day, viewers. Welcome to another edition of InspirAfrica Official. I'm Nakash. It's been quite a week here in our studio as we've been tracking developments across the continent, but today, we turn our attention to a story that's gripping Southern Africa. A story that could define Zambia's democratic future. Today's lead story: Zambia stands at a precipice. Two powerful voices from the Catholic Church have risen, their warnings echoing through the copper-rich nation like thunder before a storm. One speaks of bloodbath and destruction. The other calls the faithful to march. And between these two declarations lies a nation holding its breath, wondering what November 28th will bring. Picture this: cathedral bells ringing across Lusaka, a homily delivered with tears and trembling urgency. An archbishop, his voice heavy with grief, warning that selective justice and unchecked violence are pushing Zambia toward the unthinkable, toward strife, toward bloodshed, toward the destruction of innocent lives. But is anyone listening? And just days later, another archbishop steps forward, not with words of fear, but with a call to action. The Constitution, he declares, is the covenant between the state and its people. When that covenant is manipulated, he says, the faithful must rise. So what happens when the church stops praying for peace and starts marching for it? What happens when religious leaders who've counseled patience finally say, enough? What happens when 70% of a nation, a deeply Christian nation, is told that silence is complicity, that their democracy is slipping away while they watch? And perhaps the most urgent question of all, when tens of thousands gather at State House on November 28th, will Zambia see a peaceful demonstration that strengthens democracy? Or will Archbishop Banda's darkest prophecy come true? This is a must-watch for anyone. Factual foundation, background and timeline. The crisis came to light most dramatically this past week, but its roots run deep into Zambia's constitutional struggles. The bloodbath warning, November 22nd, 2025. The revelation sent shockwaves through Lusaka yesterday when Archbishop Dr. Alick Banda of the Catholic Archdiocese of Lusaka delivered a midday homily at the Cathedral of the Child Jesus. Speaking to the congregation, the Archbishop painted a grim picture of Zambia's trajectory, warning that escalating violence could spiral into something far worse. The Archbishop's warning came in the context of recent violent incidents that have rocked Zambian politics. On November 20th, Given Labinda, acting president of the opposition Patriotic Front, was violently attacked in Kabwe, allegedly by suspected UPND cadres. Just weeks earlier, President Hakainde Hichilema himself was stoned in Chingola. Two incidents that have exposed the raw nerve of political violence in the country. But Archbishop Banda's concern extends beyond individual attacks. He sees a pattern: selective application of the rule of law, selective provision of security, and what he calls selective administration of justice. The call to march, November 22nd, 2025. On the very same day, speaking on Radio Lutanda's weekly program Ishwi Liakwa Kasima, Voice of the Shepherd, Archbishop Ignatius Chama of the Kasama Archdiocese, who also serves as president of the Zambia Conference of Catholic Bishops, issued his own urgent message. But his was a call to action. Archbishop Chama announced the Catholic Church's support for the Oasis Forum's planned mass demonstration on November 28th at State House in Lusaka. The protest aims to challenge what religious leaders describe as a dangerous erosion of constitutional safeguards through rushed and illegitimate constitutional amendments. The constitutional crisis. At the heart of this unrest lies the government's controversial push to amend the Constitution. On November 13th, 2025, the government set a final deadline for submissions to the Technical Committee on drafting amendments to the Constitution, a timeline Archbishop Banda previously called grossly inadequate. The church leaders have consistently argued that this constitutional review process lacks legal foundation, pointing to the Constitutional Court's indication that the current approach is not properly grounded in law. They see it as an attempt to manipulate the nation's supreme law for narrow political interests ahead of the 2026 general elections. The timeline is critical. Parliament is set to dissolve in less than 7 months. Elections loom. And the government is pushing constitutional changes that critics say could fundamentally alter the balance of power. The police response. November 22nd, 2025. Hours after Archbishop Chama's radio address, The Zambia Police Service issued a statement through Public Relations Officer Godfrey Chilabai. While acknowledging the constitutional right to peaceful assembly, the statement reminded organizers that demonstrations must comply with the Public Order Act and obtain proper authorization. The police response has added another layer of tension. Will the authorities allow the November 28th protest to proceed? Will they protect demonstrators, as Archbishop Chama requested? Or will attempts to suppress the march fulfill Archbishop Banda's prophecy of violence? Direct evidence, quotes and testimony. Archbishop Banda's warning. Standing at the pulpit of the Cathedral of the Child Jesus, Archbishop Alick Banda delivered words that have since reverberated across the nation. When we reflect upon violence building up in our society, one wonders where we are headed to. It seems we are averse to peace. However, if measures are not taken to avert what we are seeing, selective application of the rule of law, selective provision of security, and selective administration of justice, I am afraid this may turn our society into strife, bloodbath, and destruction of both innocent lives and property. The Archbishop's voice, according to those present, carried both sorrow and urgency as he continued. The moment is now to make hard choices and hard decisions more than rhetoric. It is time we opened up our eyes and recognized the signs pointing towards destruction and changed the course. Drawing on Scripture, he invoked the image of Jerusalem's rejection of Christ. Sin and evil can never bring about peace. Jesus cried tears of sorrow because Jerusalem did not receive him, and did not recognize the decisive moment of choice it needed to make. Unfortunately, the inhabitants had to live with the consequences of rejecting the gospel. His grief was about a love that had been rejected. Archbishop Chama's call. In contrast, Archbishop Chama's message was one of righteous action rather than warning. Speaking on his weekly radio program, he framed the protest in moral and constitutional terms. The Constitution is not a mere legal document. It is the covenant between the state and its people. When that covenant is manipulated, when rights are quietly stripped away under the guise of reform, it is not only the duty of citizens, it is the conscience of the faithful, to rise in peaceful, orderly protest. He was explicit about the Church's position on violence versus complicity. The Church does not endorse disorder. We reject violence, property, destruction, or incitement. But we also reject complicity. When governance moves away from transparency, equity, and accountability, when the dignity of the poor and the protections of the vulnerable are at risk, the faithful must speak, and they must march. Addressing Zambia's 70% Christian population, Archbishop Chama issued a challenge. I warn against apathy, particularly among the country's estimated 70% Christian population. Silence in the face of governance overreach undermines both democracy and moral leadership. Direct appeal to police. Perhaps his most pointed words were directed at law enforcement. Protesters are not enemies of the state. They are its conscience. The true enemies are those who enrich themselves through corruption, who silence dissent, and who manipulate institutions to serve private interests, not the public good. He continued with a memorable metaphor. Let the police be the shield for the people, not the sword against them. The real threat to national stability is not the crowd at State House. It is the quiet erosion of justice behind closed doors. His closing charge. Archbishop Chama concluded with words that have become a rallying cry. The Constitution belongs to the people. And when it is threatened, the people must answer. Not with rage, but with resolve. Not with chaos, but with clarity. Not with silence, but with sacred courage. The Archdiocese of Lusaka's official statement. In a formal statement released on November 20th, the Archdiocese of Lusaka had already laid out its position on political violence. The recourse to violence is increasingly becoming the mainstream in Zambian politics lately. Jesus didn't advocate violence or commit any violent acts except when he cleansed the temple. Justly so. He didn't enjoy seeing the weak oppressed nor the innocent suffer. The statement specifically condemned the attack on Given Labinda while calling for consistent application of justice. Deeper analysis, implications and reactions. The Church's credibility crisis. The dual pronouncements from Zambia's Catholic leadership reveal not unity, but complexity. Archbishop Banda, based in the capital Lusaka, has long been viewed as sympathetic to the opposition Patriotic Front. His critics point out that his moral outrage appears selective, vocal about violence against opposition figures, silent when government officials face attacks. Political commentator Sikale captured this criticism bluntly in an opinion piece. A bishop who only condemns violence when it involves people he dislikes is not a messenger of God. He is a partisan activist masquerading in a collar. The government has indeed taken swift action against the perpetrators of the Banda attack, arresting at least 7 suspects. President Hichilema has publicly stated that those responsible are on their own. A declaration that government supporters say proves the administration's commitment to justice. Yet Archbishop Chama's position is harder to dismiss as partisan. As president of the entire Zambia Conference of Catholic Bishops, his call for protest is institutional, not individual. He frames the November 28th demonstration not as opposition politics but as constitutional fidelity, a defense of democratic principles that transcend party allegiances. The constitutional question. At the center of this crisis lies a fundamental question. Who owns the Constitution? The government argues it has the mandate to reform governance structures, pointing to its electoral victory and the need for modernization. Minister-level officials have defended the constitutional review as necessary for improving political representation and participation. The church and civil society counter that the process itself is illegitimate. They cite the Constitutional Court's previous rulings, the rushed timeline, and the lack of genuine public consultation. Archbishop Banda called the Mushabadi-led technical committee potentially complicit in a process that undermines the democratic and constitutional gains Zambia has made over the years. The timing raises eyebrows on both sides. Critics see the amendments as an attempt to tilt the playing field before the 2026 elections. Government supporters argue that opponents are using constitutional objections as political cover to mobilize against a popular incumbent. Historical echoes. Zambia's history is marked by church-state tension. President Kenneth Kaunda clashed with Catholic priests during the one-party era. Presidents Chiluba, Mwanawasa, Sata, and Lungu all attempted to weaken church influence when faced with criticism. Under President Hichilema, the relationship has been particularly fraught. Documents released by legal scholars Dr. Sishiwa and John Sangwa SC allege that the government has lobbied the Vatican for Archbishop Banda's removal. Accusations the government has neither confirmed nor denied. This historical pattern suggests that what we're witnessing is not unique, but rather the latest chapter in a recurring struggle. Political leaders seeking compliance, religious leaders claiming prophetic independence. The international dimension. Regional observers are watching carefully. Zambia has long been considered one of Africa's more stable democracies, with peaceful transfers of power and robust civil society. A violent crackdown on the November 28th protest could damage that reputation and invite international criticism. The African Union, the Southern African Development Community, and international partners have invested heavily in Zambia's democratic project. How the government handles peaceful protests tests its commitment to the democratic values it claims to uphold. The youth factor. Archbishop Chama invoked Pope Francis's 2013 World Youth Day message, "Do not watch from the balcony." He urged Zambian youth specifically to engage, recognizing that young people are both the most energized by political activism and the most vulnerable to violence if protests turn chaotic. With unemployment high and economic frustration mounting, youth participation could dramatically increase the scale of the November 28th demonstration. Whether that energy remains peaceful depends on leadership, police conduct, and the restraint of all parties. The ambiguities. Several questions remain unresolved. Will the Oasis Forum receive formal authorization for the November 28th protest? How many people will actually turn out, and from which constituencies? What specific outcomes are the organizers demanding? Withdrawal of amendments? Extended consultation? Dissolution of the technical committee? What happens if the government refuses to engage with protesters' demands? Are there behind-the-scenes negotiations happening that might defuse tensions before the 28th? These ambiguities create space for either escalation or resolution. The next 5 days will be critical. Systemic concerns. Beyond the immediate crisis, both archbishops point to deeper systemic failures. The erosion of institutional independence. Selective application of justice. The politicization of security forces. Growing ethnic tensions, often coded but increasingly explicit. Economic hardship creating powder keg conditions. A media environment increasingly polarized and partisan. These are not problems solved by a single protest or constitutional amendment. They require sustained commitment to rule of law, genuine dialogue across political divides, and leaders willing to prioritize national cohesion over party advantage. Archbishop Banda's warning of bloodshed is not inevitable, but it's also not groundless. When trust in institutions collapses, when justice is perceived as arbitrary, when political violence becomes normalized, the threshold for catastrophe drops dramatically. Zambia has avoided the violent upheavals that have plagued some of its neighbors. That record is an achievement, but it's also fragile. What happens on November 28th may determine whether that record holds. Thank you for watching today's coverage of this critical moment in Zambian history. This is a story that matters not just for Zambia but for the entire continent. When churches speak this clearly, when they move from pulpit to pavement, it signals that the stakes have risen beyond ordinary politics. I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think the November 28th protest will remain peaceful? Do Archbishop Banda's warnings reflect genuine concern or political bias? And for our Zambian viewers specifically, will you join the march at State House? This is a developing situation, and we'll be tracking it closely. In the coming days, we'll be watching for any government response to the church's statements, any developments with police authorization, and most critically, what actually unfolds when November 28th arrives. Democracy is never guaranteed. It's sustained by citizens willing to defend it, through votes, through voices, and yes, sometimes through peaceful protest. Zambia is about to test that principle. We'll be here to cover what comes next. Until tomorrow, this is Nakash for InspirAfrica Official. Stay informed, stay engaged, and as Archbishop Chama said, answer not with rage, but with resolve. Not with chaos, but with clarity. Not with silence, but with sacred courage.